About 3 years ago, I took a group of teenagers on a mission trip to Moldova. And it was one of the best trips I've ever been on. I mean, besides just being a cool place to visit, incredible relationships were made on that trip. And that trip was life-changing for me, but maybe not in the way that you think. Because you see, the trip was the trip where I was introduced to two of the most dangerous and insulting words in the human language. Your mom. I know how ridiculous that sounds, but there were these two girls on the trip who were still convinced that your mom jokes were hilarious and cool, and they said them like every 5 seconds. And y'all, I couldn't help it. I started saying them too. And it kind of became like our trip's inside joke. Have you ever been on a trip that had its own inside joke? It just became the thing we did on this trip. And I just kept making, by the time we were done, I'm making more your mom jokes than they were. And I figured that I would get back home and stop, right? But that's not what happened at all. Like, I walk in the door at my house and I'm telling mom jokes to my wife. I see my brother and I'm telling mom jokes to him. We have the same mom. Now, at this point, you're probably thinking, what's the point of the story? And what does it have to do with me? Great question. I promise there's a point. And the point is this. What I discovered through this whole your mom thing is that it's really easy to pick up a habit. Like, think about your closest friends. You probably say a lot of the same phrases they say, don't you? Maybe you even catch yourself using the same hand gestures that they do. Have you ever noticed that? Or maybe you see this when it comes to your family. Like, you catch yourself using the same phrases or making the same jokes. And even if you don't do it on purpose, and even if you hate it, you can't help it. It almost happens unconsciously. Because here's the reality. When you're exposed to anything over time, it has an effect on you. It's easier to see it with the people we hang out with, but this isn't just true in our relationships. Exposure over time to anyone and anything always has an effect on you. Think about it like this. Spend time in the sun and you get a tan or a burn. Spend time in another country and you pick up an accent. Spend time in the marching band and you count steps unconsciously. Spend time playing sports and you critique every player's move you see in that sport. Spend time anywhere with anyone doing anything over time and you'll pick up some of the same patterns. So here's the question. Where do you spend most of your time? Because if what we just said is true, that our exposure to something over time affects us, then where we spend our time matters. Maybe you spend most of your time watching Netflix. Maybe you spend most of your time watching your favorite YouTubers. Or maybe your time spent listening to music, watching sports, or just hanging out on social media. I don't know what it is for you, but I would be willing to bet that a good bit of your time involves entertainment of some sort. And while that may not seem like a big deal and, mostly harmless, I think it's a really big deal. And here's why. Because exposure over time always has an effect on you. You see, whether you realize it or not, what you watch, what you listen to, and who you follow is ultimately shaping the person you're gonna become. And I know that seems drastic or maybe even a little bit dramatic. And talking about your entertainment choices at church might make you a little bit nervous, like you might be thinking, dude, what's the big deal? I can watch a horror movie without becoming a serial killer. What are we talking about? I can watch an R-rated movie without living an R-rated life. I can listen to, Migos without acting like, Quavo and doing some crazy weird stuff. So is this really as big a deal as you are making it sound? Or maybe when I bring up entertainment, you think you know exactly where I'm going. And you're just like waiting for me. You're waiting for me to tell you to delete all of your favorite artists off of your phone or whatever. And maybe you're thinking I'm gonna tell you to only listen to worship music or just watch Christian movies or cancel your Netflix subscription and start reading the Bible for 5 hours each night before bed. And guys, that's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is this. Most of the time, when we pick up a pattern, a habit, or phrase, it's without thinking. We don't make a decision to pick it up, we just sort of end up with it as a part of our lives. Whether it's the language in the songs that we listen to, a behavior we see in the shows that we watch, or a way of thinking influenced by our favorite YouTube channel. And here's the thing, it's not a sudden change. It happens slowly, over time. Think about it. When do you notice that the battery on your cell phone is getting low? I don't know about you, but for me, it's usually when I can't get somewhere to actually charge it and when I don't have a charging block with me. But the battery of our phones never just drops from 100 down to 5. No way, it starts getting low way before we ever notice. It was a small change that happened little by little by little by little. And a lot of times that's the way our entertainment affects us, little by little, when you can't hardly notice it. So no, it's not that listening to Drake turns you into Drake, or listening to 3 Florida Georgia Line songs in a row automatically makes you talk with a country twang. No, but over time, what you consume impacts the person you become. And one day, you could wake up with a different perspective on life than you ever thought would happen, and not necessarily in a good way. Over time, what we consume begins to influence our behavior. And if we're not careful, what we consume can consume us. That's why what Paul says to the church in Rome is so significant for us and what we're talking about today. Look at what he says. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. In other words, when Paul writes that we should offer our bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God, Paul is saying, hey, everything you say and do should be used to bring glory to God. But what's cool is he doesn't end there. He actually does tell us, how do we do this? He says, do not conform to the pattern of this world. And what does that mean? Well, Paul is saying that there is a pattern to this world, like things that are common to your world, things that everyone is doing without thinking about it. And you already know what I mean. Guys, there's a pattern of talk that happens about ladies when you're with other guys in the locker room or on the sports field. It's not a good pattern, but it's a pattern. Ladies, it's the pattern of talk happening in the lunchroom about certain people and certain reputations where certain judgments are made. You see, our culture has a pattern of thinking when it comes to how you treat people, how you treat your own body, how you talk to someone you want to date, how you talk to people you disagree with, how you talk about people. And if you and I aren't thinking about it, do you know what happens? We pick up the pattern too. If we aren't paying attention, we can find ourselves thinking and talking the same way, even if it's not necessarily something we agree with. And that's why Paul says not to conform, because he doesn't want us to unintentionally settle for less than what God designed us for. He doesn't want us to become a product of the culture we're in, because here's the deal. Culture is moving in a direction, and with little to no effort at all, it will take us somewhere without our even realizing it. It'll lead you to certain thought processes and behaviors. So Paul reminds us to stay on our toes, to keep close watch, to decide for ourselves, and not to have our lives decided for us. In other words, Paul tells us not to fall into the patterns so that we don't miss out on what God has in store for us. So then, what are we supposed to do? Well, Paul tells us to be transformed by the renewing of our minds. Renewing is a word that we're used to hearing in the renovation and construction world. Like if you've ever watched HGTV or overheard your parents watching it, the word renovation is said about every 5 seconds, and it's basically the definition of renewing. Now, you can say what you want about HGTV, but it's always amazing to see what a house or building started out like and what it ended up looking like. Because when people invest their money to improve something, they pick out all the best stuff to put in it. Like they pick the best cabinets, the best flooring, the best color of paint, you know. In some cases, the family moves out and everyone gets some space while they figure out the best things to put in the new house. And when the project's done, the best part is seeing how the value of the house went up, right? The people made a major financial investment, but now the house is worth way more, you know, it has more value. It's more significant. See, Paul is asking us to go through that same renovation or renewing process with our minds. He's encouraging us to take a break, slow down, examine the patterns of the world, and then evaluate what the best things are to put in our minds. In the same way, we need to decide what needs to go and what needs to stay, what needs to be taken out and what needs to be put in. We need to ask, what will add value to our lives? What will help us become more of the people God has created us to be? And here's what I love about this. Paul isn't saying, delete your Spotify account, you know, end your Netflix description, only listen to or watch things that have been pre-decided for you. Turn off your brain and just watch, listen, and enjoy what you're told. In other words, Paul isn't saying, like, think less. No, he's saying think more. You're the one with the power here. Paul isn't interested in deciding what you can enjoy for you so that you don't have to. No, he's saying don't let the world decide for you. Don't let the patterns start to take over your decision making and think for you. You do the thinking. By the way, here's a fun fact. Your brain is amazing at finding patterns. Did you know that? When you always turn left after McDonald's to get home, your brain notices. When you always go to English class after algebra, your brain notices. When you always open Instagram when you pick up your phone, your brain notices. And it starts to learn the pattern. And there's a reason for that. Your brain learns patterns so it doesn't have to work as hard. It can stop thinking. It can relax. That's why you accidentally turn left after McDonald's even when you're not going home. It's why you open Instagram without even thinking, because your brain has learned a pattern. And so it just follows it. And that's not bad, it's efficient. But that means our brains are looking to establish patterns all the time, including when we listen to music, watch movies, watch YouTube videos, or experience anything else over a period of time. So to save time and energy, it will look for ways to stop thinking, to find patterns. But your mind is too important to let that happen, you guys. You can't let your brain default to finding patterns and switching off. You have to renovate. You have to renew your mind by challenging that thinking, asking questions, talking back, and refusing to let anybody else decide for you. In other words, you need to evaluate your entertainment. Evaluate your entertainment. So how do we do that? Well, here are 2 steps for making that happen. Ask questions and make changes. And here's what I mean. Every once in a while, you just need to pause and ask yourselves questions like these. What are some things that I know are okay to enjoy? What are some things that I know are bad for me? And what are some things that I'm not sure about? Ask those questions. And once you've done that, well, then you need to begin acting on it. Like, give your entertainment some boundaries. Set time limits for yourself if you aren't sure if you're being affected by something. Like, limit your exposure and just see what happens. And find other forms of entertainment to replace the forms that you know you should let go of. In other words, every once in a while, just pay attention to the patterns in your life and look to see if there are any patterns developing that may not be helpful. And then make necessary changes to course correct. So as you head out, all I want you to do is evaluate your entertainment. Don't vow to quit it. Don't delete your Spotify or Netflix account on the way to small group. Don't decide anything. Just evaluate. Like, give it a report card in your mind. And maybe this sounds crazy to you, but guys, what if it's true? What if your life is actually affected by the entertainment that you choose? You owe it to yourself as an adult to at least think about something that can have this amount of power over you.